The desperate call for help. The skies over the planet Tarvos were ablaze with fire. Massive alien ships hovered in the atmosphere, their weapons raining destruction on the cities below. The Zurak swarm had arrived, their black and red ships cutting through the planet's defenses like they were made of paper. Tarvos had never stood a chance. Its inhabitants, mostly peaceful traders and farmers, scrambled to find shelter, but there was no escape from the chaos. Inside a crumbling bunker, a small group of refugees huddled together, their eyes filled with fear and despair. The sound of explosions echoed around them, each blast shaking the ground like a thunderclap. Among them, an alien elder with skin like shimmering silver clutched an ancient communicator. Her hands trembled as she keyed in the last emergency frequency she could think of. "Is anyone out there?" Her voice cracked as she spoke into the device. "This is Tarvos. We are under attack. Please, anyone, help us." The message was broadcast into the void, carried on fragile waves of hope. The Zurak swarm had destroyed countless worlds before this one. Their strategy was always the same: strike fast, take everything of value, and leave nothing alive. The refugees had heard the stories, and now they were living the nightmare. Above the planet, Zurak warships moved with terrifying precision. Their commander, a hulking creature with jagged horns and glowing red eyes, watched the destruction from the bridge of his flagship. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Pathetic," he growled. "Another weak world added to our collection. They won't even bother to resist." But something unexpected happened. One of the Zurak operators called out, his voice tinged with confusion. "Commander, we're detecting a signal leaving the system. It's a distress call." The commander sneered. "Let them call for help. Who would dare challenge the Zurak swarm?" The refugees in the bunker knew their chances were slim. The elder slumped against the wall, her strength fading. Around her, families held onto each other, whispering prayers to gods who had long stopped listening. A young child, her wide, tear-filled eyes shining in the dim light, tugged at the elder's sleeve. "Will someone come?" she asked softly. The elder hesitated. She wanted to offer comfort, but the truth was harsh. I don't know, child. But we must hope." Far away, in the depths of space, the distress signal continued its journey, passing by dead stars and drifting debris. For hours, there was no response. Tarvos grew quieter as the Zurak forces tightened their grip. Smoke choked the skies, and the once thriving cities were reduced to rubble. Just when all seemed lost, a blip appeared on the Zurak sensors. At first, it was faint, barely noticeable amidst the wreckage of the system. But then it grew stronger, an energy signature unlike anything the Zurak had encountered before. The operator's voice wavered. "Commander, we have incoming ships." The commander turned sharply. "What ships? Who are they?" It's the humans." The room fell silent for a moment. The Zurak knew of humans, but only from rumors. They were said to be a young species, reckless and unpredictable, but not a major threat. Yet as the Zurak fleet adjusted their scanners, the scope of the approaching force became clear. "They're coming in fast," the operator said, panic creeping into his tone. "And their fleet is enormous." Back on Tarvos, the elder's communicator crackled to life. A voice, calm and commanding, broke through the static. "This is Captain Darius of the Human Federation Fleet. We've received your distress call. Hold tight. We're on our way." The bunker erupted in gasps and murmurs. The elder's eyes widened in disbelief. Could it be true? Were the humans really coming to their rescue? Outside, the skies began to shift. The Zurak ships, which had dominated the horizon, now seemed to hesitate, their movements less confident. Above them, the first human ships emerged from hyperspace. Sleek and silver, their hulls glinted like blades in the sunlight. They moved with precision, forming a wall of steel and firepower. The refugees stared at the scene, hope flickering in their hearts for the first time. The young girl tugged on the elder's sleeve again, her voice full of wonder. "They came," she whispered. "The humans really came." The elder nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, child. They came." As the human fleet positioned itself between the Zurek and the planet, Captain Darius's voice rang out again, this time directed at the Zurek commander. "This is your only warning. Leave now or face the consequences." The Zurek commander laughed, his voice booming across the comms. "Humans, you think you can stop us? You're outnumbered." But Darius remained calm. Outnumbered doesn't mean outmatched. The stage was set. The refugees held their breath as the Zurek prepared to respond. Above them, the human fleet stood ready, their weapons primed. For the first time in living memory, the Zurek swarm would learn what it meant to face humanity, and the galaxy would never be the same. The arrival of the human fleet. The Zurek swarm believed themselves invincible. For decades, they had torn across the galaxy, crushing planets and civilizations under the weight of their unstoppable war machine. Their name alone struck fear into entire systems, and most species surrendered the moment they appeared. Yet, as the first human ships emerged from hyperspace, the Zurek fleet hesitated. The flagship of the human armada, Valor's Edge, was unlike anything the Zurek had ever seen. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of any Zurek warship, with sleek, angular plating that seemed to shimmer against the light of Tarvos's burning atmosphere. Hundreds of smaller vessels followed behind it, forming perfect formations that sliced through the darkness of space like razors. On the bridge of the Zurek flagship, Commander Kalros leaned forward in his command chair, his crimson eyes narrowing as he studied the incoming fleet. He could hear the faint hum of nervous chatter from his officers, though they dared not speak too loudly in his presence. "Humans," Kalros muttered, his lips curling into a sneer. "They dare stand against us." His second-in-command, a smaller Zurek officer with a jagged scar across his face, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, I have heard stories. The humans are said to possess weapons that rival our own. Perhaps we should." Kalros' clawed hand slammed down on the arm of his chair, silencing the officer with a sharp growl. "Stories mean nothing," he snapped. "No one challenges the Zurek and survives. Ready the fleet." Across the battlefield, human ships continued to pour out of hyperspace in flawless synchronization. Their movements were deliberate, calculated, almost as if they had anticipated the Zurek response. Within moments, the sky above Tarvos was filled with the gleaming hulls of warships, each one bristling with weaponry that pulsed with restrained energy. Inside the bunker on Tarvos, the refugees watched the unfolding scene with bated breath. The elder's communicator buzzed again, and the voice of Captain Darius crackled through. "To the people of Tarvos, this is the Human Federation fleet. We have received your distress signal and are moving to engage the Zurek swarm. Remain calm and stay inside your shelters. Help is here." The elder closed her eyes, gripping the communicator tightly. Relief flooded her heart, but uncertainty still lingered. The young girl at her side tugged on her sleeve. "Are the humans going to stop them?" she asked softly. The elder hesitated. "I don't know, child, but they seem prepared." Outside, the Zurek fleet began to shift. Warships drifted into attack formations, their massive cannons locking onto the human vessels. Energy signatures flared as the Zurek prepared to unleash the full force of their arsenal. But something was strange. The human ships didn't respond with threats or warnings. Instead, they continued moving, slow, steady, and deliberate. Their weapons remained silent, even as the Zurek commanders barked orders to prepare for battle. On the bridge of Valor's Edge, Captain Darius stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the Zurek fleet through the reinforced viewing window. The calm hum of his crew surrounded him, but his focus never wavered. "Commander," his tactical officer said quietly, "Zurek fleet is preparing to fire. Orders." Darius's voice was calm, almost bored. "Hold position." The officer hesitated, glancing nervously at the incoming Zurich ships. "Sir, they'll have the advantage if we hold position," Darius repeated, this time with a faint smile. His eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. "Let them make the first move. They don't know what they're dealing with yet." Seconds stretched into minutes. The Zurich commanders grew impatient, their pride refusing to let them sit idle. "Open fire," Calrose growled. Zurich warships unleashed a storm of plasma bolts and missile barrages. The sky lit up as the Zurich's firepower surged toward the human fleet. It was enough to reduce any planet to rubble, enough to cripple the armadas of most known species. But as the first wave of Zurich missiles struck the human ships, something extraordinary happened. The human vessels barely flinched. Energy shields rippled across their hulls, absorbing the barrage like pebbles tossed into a lake. Zurich plasma bolts dissipated harmlessly, and the missiles exploded long before they could reach their targets. Calrose's eyes widened in disbelief. What is this?" The humans remained silent. No retaliation, no counterattack, just silence and steady advance. "They're toying with us," the scared officer whispered in fear. Calrose snarled but said nothing. Finally, Captain Darius's voice echoed through every Zurich channel, his tone calm but edged with quiet authority. "Zurich swarm, this is your final warning. Leave this system immediately. Your weapons are ineffective, and you will not survive a direct engagement." Laughter erupted across the Zurich command deck. Calrose leaned closer to his communicator, his voice dripping with arrogance. "And what if we don't?" Darius's response was cold and simple. "Then you'll see why the galaxy fears us." The skies of Tarvos grew silent once more as the Zurich fleet prepared for another assault. But this time, the humans were ready to respond. And when they did, the Zurich would finally understand what it meant to face the fury of humanity. The first strike. The Zurich swarm had always relied on overwhelming force. Their strategy was simple: crush the enemy with numbers and firepower until nothing remained. Against most species, this tactic worked flawlessly. Civilizations crumbled, and planets fell like dominoes before the Zurich war machine. But today was different. As the Zurich unleashed another barrage of plasma fire and missiles, the human fleet finally responded. It wasn't rushed or frantic. The humans didn't scatter or dodge. They moved with a terrifying precision, as if every step of the battle had been predicted long before the first shot was fired. On the bridge of Valor's Edge, Captain Darius raised his hand. "Begin the strike. Target their flagship first." His voice was calm, almost casual. There was no sense of urgency, no panic. It was the tone of someone who had already won and was merely waiting for the enemy to realize it. Across the battlefield, human ships shifted into position. Lines of bright energy began forming along the sides of their vessels, glowing with an intensity that sent ripples through space itself. The Zurich watched in confusion. This wasn't standard weaponry. The Zurich had faced countless species, but no one had weapons that looked like this. Then, without warning, the first human strike hit. A beam of crackling blue light erupted from the hull of Valor's Edge, slicing through the Zurich flagship shields as if they weren't even there. The beam continued, carving straight through the center of the massive warship, severing it in two. The entire Zurich command deck erupted in sparks and flames as emergency sirens blared. Commander Calrose's eyes widened in shock as the bridge around him trembled violently. "Report," he roared, gripping the arm of his chair as the lights flickered. An officer stumbled forward, his hands shaking as he read the data in front of him. "Commander, our shields, they're gone. Hull integrity is down by 60%. We've lost weapons control." Calrose's claws dug into the console. "How?" "One shot did this." But it wasn't just one. The human fleet moved in perfect synchrony. Each shot found its mark, disabling Zurich ships one by one with surgical precision. Smaller human vessels darted between Zurich cruisers, unleashing bursts of concentrated energy that left Zurich engines crippled and drifting. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Target their lead ships, Calrose barked, but the panic in his voice betrayed him. Zurek warships began firing blindly in all directions, but the human ships danced between the blasts effortlessly. Where Zurek missiles flew wide, human shots hit dead center every time. Back on the surface of Tarvos, the refugees stared in disbelief. From their bunker, they could see the explosions lighting up the sky, Zurek ships falling one by one. The elder held the young girl close as she whispered softly, "Look at them, child." The Zurak were supposed to be invincible. The girl's eyes sparkled with awe. "The humans aren't afraid of them at all," she said, gripping the elder's hand tightly. High above, Captain Darius watched as the Zurek fleet began to scatter. Some ships broke formation and attempted to retreat, but the humans gave them no quarter. One by one, their engines were disabled, leaving them stranded and powerless. Calrose's scared second-in-command turned to him, desperation in his eyes. "Commander, we must withdraw. If we stay, we'll be annihilated." Calrose bared his teeth in frustration. Never before had the Zurek been forced to flee. They were predators, not prey. And yet, he could see it now. The humans weren't just technologically advanced. They were calculating. Precise. This wasn't a lucky strike or a surprise ambush. The humans had prepared for this. "They were waiting for us," Calrose whispered, realization dawning on him like a cold chill. For years, humanity had been quietly building their power, studying the galaxy's greatest threats. They hadn't shown their full strength until now. "Commander," the second-in-command urged, "we must leave. If we don't, the Zurek swarm could fall today." Calrose clenched his fists, rage boiling beneath the surface. But even he couldn't deny the truth. "Order the retreat," he growled. "But this isn't over." The Zurek warships that remained began pulling away, their engines glowing faintly as they scrambled for hyperspace. But just as they were about to escape, the voice of Captain Darius echoed across their communication channels once more. "There is no retreat for those who prey on the innocent," Darius said coldly. "You should have left when I gave you the chance." In an instant, the human fleet shifted forward, cutting off the Zurek's escape route. The flagship Valor's Edge led the charge, its weapons blazing as it tore through the fleeing ships. Calrose could only watch in silence as his fleet crumbled before his eyes. The Zurek swarm had learned a valuable lesson that day. Humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. Humanity's secret weapon. As the Zurek warships fell one by one, a disturbing realization settled over the survivors. This wasn't just advanced technology at work. There was something deeper, something far more dangerous driving the humans' overwhelming success. It wasn't brute force that had turned the tide of battle. It was precision, calculation. Every move the human fleet made felt deliberate, as if they were always 10 steps ahead of the Zurek. On the burning bridge of the Zurek command ship, Commander Calrose clenched his fists. His once mighty fleet, the pride of the Zurek swarm, was now reduced to drifting wreckage. "How?" he growled, his claws digging into the cold metal of his chair. "What are they using?" His second-in-command wiped sweat from his brow, his voice trembling. "Commander, they're ships. They're not fighting like us. They know our positions before we move. It's almost as if they're predicting our strategy." Calrose narrowed his eyes. Predicting. Suddenly, the memory of whispered rumors about humanity surfaced in his mind. There had been stories, fragments of intercepted communications and vague intelligence reports. Humans were developing something new, something the galaxy didn't fully understand. But Calrose, like many other commanders, dismissed these tales as exaggerations. Now he wasn't so sure. Years earlier, a hidden human research base. Deep beneath the surface of an icy moon in the Sol system, a human research facility buzzed with quiet intensity. The brightest minds of humanity gathered here, far from the eyes of the galaxy. Inside the heart of the base, massive screens display projections of alien ships, simulated battles playing out in real time. Dr. Elena Cross, lead scientist of the Quantum Combat Initiative, stood at the center of it all, watching with satisfaction as simulated Zurich vessels were dismantled piece by artificial intelligence systems. "This," she said, gesturing to the screens, "is the future of warfare." Across from her, Admiral Beckett raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me this program can predict enemy movements before they make them?" Dr. Cross smiled. "Not predict, Admiral. Calculate." She stepped closer to the console, pulling up a glowing display of thousands of interconnected lines of data. "We developed an AI combat system capable of processing trillions of potential scenarios in seconds. It doesn't just analyze enemy patterns, it anticipates their psychological tendencies. Every species has habits, even in war. The Zurich are aggressive but predictable. They favor overwhelming their enemies with numbers. Our AI accounts for that, running millions of simulations in the background during live combat." Beckett folded his arms, leaning closer. "And this system, it can't be countered." Dr. Cross's eyes darkened. "There's nothing in the galaxy that can match this level of computational power. We don't just fight wars now, Admiral. We solve them." Back in the present, Tarvos Warzone. Commander Calrose stared at his flickering monitors, watching as another Zurich warship was effortlessly destroyed. "Commander," his officer barked, "their ships are shifting formation again. It's like they knew we'd try to regroup." Calrose's eyes widened. "They do know." The realization struck like a hammer. The humans weren't reacting to the Zurich's movements. They were anticipating them. "This isn't just advanced technology," Calrose whispered to himself. "This is impossible." From the bridge of Valor's Edge, Captain Darius studied the battlefield with cold precision. Streams of data scrolled past his screen, detailing the Zurich's every maneuver. Their attempts to reform defensive lines were already falling apart before they could complete them. "Zurich commander is hesitating," Darius's tactical officer reported. "Our AI projects a 94% chance he will attempt a flanking maneuver in the next 2 minutes." Darius gave a slight nod. "Prepare flanking interceptors. Route power to the forward cannons." The human fleet shifted once more, as if guided by an invisible hand. The Zurich had no idea they were already walking into a trap. "Zurich command ship." Calrose rose from his chair, rage burning in his veins. "Enough," he roared, slamming his fist onto the console. "I won't let this fleet fall like prey. Focus fire on their lead vessel. We'll break their spearhead." Zurich warships turned their attention toward Valor's Edge, unleashing the coordinated barrage of plasma fire and missiles. The Zurich crews shouted in fury, eager to bring down the ship that had shattered their fleet. But as the weapons surged toward the human flagship, Valor's Edge calmly advanced. Captain Darius barely blinked as the barrage approached. "Activate the quantum shields," he said quietly. The moment the Zurich weapons struck, Valor's Edge shimmered with a blue glow. Zurich missiles disintegrated, plasma beams deflected harmlessly off the hull. What should have been a devastating blow left the human flagship untouched. On the Zurich bridge, silence fell like a heavy weight. Calrose's second-in-command took a step back, his face pale. "Commander, their shield. It's absorbing everything." Calrose's claws trembled. Quantum shielding. Another whispered rumor had proven true. The humans had cracked the code of defensive technology once thought impossible to develop. Their ships were no longer vulnerable to conventional weapons. "We can't win this," Calrose admitted under his breath, the fire in his heart dimming. For the first time in his long career, he understood what fear felt like. Humanity had risen from the shadows of galactic insignificance, and they had become unstoppable. The Zurich's last stand. The Zurich swarm, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was now a scattering of broken warships drifting helplessly above Tarvos. Smoke and fire spiraled from crippled Zurich vessels, their sleek black hulls marred by the precision strikes of the human fleet. Yet, despite the crushing losses, Commander Calrose stood tall on the bridge of his damaged flagship, rage simmering beneath his crimson eyes. The Zurak did not surrender. Surrender was weakness, and Kalros would rather see his fleet burn than bend the knee to a species the galaxy once considered primitive. "We're not done yet," Kalros snarled, his voice echoing across the silent command deck. His officers, battered and bruised, exchanged uneasy glances. Every move they had made had been anticipated. Every strategy had been countered. The humans fought not like warriors, but like architects dismantling a structure one piece at a time. But Kalros knew that sometimes desperation made the greatest weapon. "Prepare the obliterator cannon," he growled. The bridge fell silent. One officer stepped forward hesitantly. "Commander, that weapon hasn't been tested. The energy draw could destroy our own ship." Kalros' glare burned into the officer like a dagger. Better to die fighting than live defeated. "Do it." Reluctantly, the crew obeyed. Massive conduits and reactors deep within the Zurak flagship groaned as they redirected all available energy to the cannon mounted beneath the ship's hull. A low rumble vibrated through the deck as the weapon began to charge. On the human flagship Valor's Edge, Captain Darius watched with quiet interest as energy spikes registered on his scanners. The Zurak were making their final move. "Tactical report," Darius said calmly. His tactical officer glanced at the data flooding across his display. "Their flagship is diverting power to an unknown weapon system. Based on the output, it's likely a superweapon, something capable of planetary damage." Darius gave a faint nod. Desperation. The officer shifted nervously. "Should we move to intercept?" Darius smiled faintly. "No. Let them fire." The bridge crew exchanged puzzled glances, but no one questioned the captain's orders. They had learned long ago that Darius always had a plan, even when it wasn't immediately clear. Zurak flagship. Obliterator cannon chamber. Deep within the Zurak flagship, the obliterator cannon's chamber thrummed with unstable energy. Engineers scrambled across catwalks, making last-minute adjustments as arcs of blue lightning crackled along the weapon's core. The cannon hummed louder, the glow intensifying until the ship itself seemed to shake apart at the seams. "Charging at 85%, an officer called out. Kalros stood at the command deck, staring down at the human fleet below. One shot. That was all he needed. The obliterator cannon would either tear through the enemy's lead vessel, or it would take the Zurak flagship down with it. He smiled grimly. Fire. In orbit above Tarvos, a massive beam of blinding white light erupted from the belly of the Zurak flagship, cutting through space with the force of a collapsing star. The Zurak cheered as the beam lanced toward Valor's Edge, the ship that had humiliated them. But as the beam neared, something strange happened. A faint shimmer appeared around Valor's Edge, like ripples across the surface of a pond. As the Zurak's cannon blast struck, the shimmering intensified, then bent the beam around the ship entirely. The energy curved unnaturally, flowing harmlessly past the human vessel, as if the ship itself existed outside the fabric of space. Kalros' triumphant smile faded into wide-eyed disbelief. "What?" he muttered, gripping the railing as if the answer might materialize before him. On board Valor's Edge, the bridge crew watched the failed strike in silence. Darius's second-in-command leaned closer to him. "Phase shift technology." Darius nodded. "A recent development. Our ships exist half a second out of sync with normal space when activated. Their weapons can't touch us." The officer smirked. "I almost feel sorry for them." Darius's eyes narrowed. "Don't. They'd brought this on themselves." Zurak flagship. "Commander." The second-in-command's voice was frantic. "That shot drained our core. We're losing control of the ship." Kalros' claws scraped against the metal console. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. But the battle was no longer his to command. "Commander," a desperate voice called out, "what are your orders?" Kalros stared at the wreckage around him. His warships were in tatters. Hundreds of Zurak soldiers, who had once believed in their unstoppable superiority, now stood trembling on the brink of annihilation. Finally, his shoulders sagged. "Signal surrender," Calrose said quietly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The bridge crew exhaled in relief, but there was no celebration. The Zurich swarm, the great scourge of the galaxy, had been broken in a single day. After the battle, as the Zurich fleet powered down, human ships moved into position, carefully guiding damaged vessels away from Tarvos's orbit. Shuttles descended to the planet below, bringing medical aid and supplies to the refugees who had hidden during the battle. In the bunker, the young alien girl clutched the Elder's hand as she watched human soldiers distribute food and help rebuild shattered homes. They saved us, the girl whispered. They didn't have to, but they did. The Elder nodded softly. Humans are strange creatures, she said. They fight with power but choose mercy. Perhaps the galaxy can learn from them. High above, Valor's Edge led the human fleet deeper into Zurich territory. Their victory wasn't just a message to the Zurich. It was a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity was no longer prey. They were the guardians of peace, and those who threatened the innocent would face their wrath. The refugees' gratitude. The skies over Tarvos were quiet for the first time in days. The echoes of battle had faded, leaving behind a field of Zurich wreckage drifting silently in orbit. Human vessels glided between the debris, their sleek forms reflecting the distant sun. What was once a planet on the brink of annihilation now stood under the protection of the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen: humanity. In the ruined streets of Tarvos's capital, survivors began to emerge from underground shelters. The smell of burning metal still lingered in the air, and smoke curled from distant buildings, but the Zurich were gone. A low hum filled the sky as dropships descended, their engines kicking up dust as they landed. The insignia of the Human Federation was etched onto each hull. As the ramps lowered, human soldiers in sleek blue and gray armor marched out, carrying supplies, medical equipment, and food rations. They moved with quiet efficiency, offering aid without asking for anything in return. Among the gathered refugees, a small alien girl gripped the hand of the silver-skinned elder who had led them to safety. Her wide, glowing eyes stared at the human soldiers with a mix of curiosity and awe. "Grandmother," the girl whispered, tugging at the elder's sleeve. "They're really here, the humans. They saved us." The elder nodded, her gaze fixed on the soldiers distributing supplies. "Yes," she said softly. "They came when no one else did." The crowd began to gather around the human landing zones, murmurs of relief and disbelief spreading like wildfire. The Zurich swarm had left nothing but devastation across dozens of worlds, yet Tarvos stood because humanity had intervened. As the refugees approached the soldiers, one human stepped forward. His uniform bore the insignia of a captain, and a long scar ran down the side of his face. His posture was straight, but his eyes held a quiet kindness. "Captain Darius," the elder said, stepping forward with a respectful bow. "You've saved more than just our lives today. You've saved the heart of our people." Darius met her gaze and offered a small nod. "We did what was necessary. No one should suffer under the weight of the Zurich." Another refugee, a thin, gaunt man who had survived the Zurich labor camps, stepped forward hesitantly. "But why?" he asked. "The Zurich took nothing from you. This wasn't your fight. You could have ignored our distress call, like the others." Darius's expression hardened slightly, but not in anger. His eyes scanned the faces of the gathered refugees, men, women, and children who had survived horrors no one should endure. "You're wrong," Darius said firmly. "This was our fight the moment innocent lives were threatened. Humanity doesn't stand by while others fall. Not anymore." The elder's eyes shimmered with unspoken gratitude. The small alien girl stepped forward, clutching a bundle of flowers hastily gathered from the remnants of a nearby garden. She held them up to Darius with trembling hands. "These are for you," she said quietly. "Thank you for saving us." Darius knelt, accepting the flowers with a rare smile. "I didn't do this alone," he said, glancing over his shoulder at his soldiers, who were working tirelessly to rebuild shelters and clear rubble. "We fight together, always." Later that night, a quiet moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the scared landscape, Darius stood at the edge of the refugee encampment. His gaze drifted over the distant wreckage of Zurak warships still smoldering in the hills. Footsteps approached behind him, and the elder's soft voice broke the silence. "You saved more than just Tarvos today," she said, standing beside him. The Zurak feared nothing before this battle, but now they know the galaxy isn't theirs to take. Darius didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. "We've sent a message," he said at last, "but fear alone won't hold the Zurak back forever. They'll return. Stronger, more careful next time." The elder tilted her head. "Then what will stop them?" Darius glanced down at the encampment below. Families gathered around fires, children laughing for the first time in weeks, soldiers sharing rations with grateful survivors. "Unity," Darius replied. "They divide us because they know we're stronger together." Today wasn't just about defeating the Zurak. It was about reminding the galaxy that humanity doesn't fight alone. The elder smiled faintly. "Then perhaps hope isn't lost after all." As the first stars of night settled over Tarvos, a calm stillness filled the air. The Zurak's shadow had lifted, replaced by something brighter, the unyielding resolve of humanity. A warning to the galaxy. The Zurak warships lay in smoldering ruin, their once imposing fleet reduced to scattered wreckage drifting in orbit above Tarvos. The battle was over, but the echoes of humanity's victory would ripple across the galaxy for years to come. As the last of the Zurak survivors were rounded up and escorted aboard human vessels, the fleet prepared to depart. The operation had been swift and decisive. There were no parades, no grand celebrations, only the quiet efficiency of soldiers who knew their work was far from finished. On the bridge of Valor's Edge, Captain Darius stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen. Below, the surface of Tarvos stretched across the horizon, still scared but healing. The Zurak had fled, but Darius knew they would return one day. The tactical officer approached, standing at attention. "Sir, the final Zurak vessels have surrendered. Our forces are securing their remaining weapons and supplies." Darius gave a small nod. "Good. And the refugees?" "Resettling in the safe zones we established. Engineers have begun repairs to their infrastructure. They'll be stable within the week." For the first time in hours, Darius allowed himself to exhale. But his mind lingered on the larger picture. This was only the beginning. He stepped forward, activating the ship's communication array. His voice would not just carry to the Zurak commanders imprisoned aboard his ships, but to the Zurak homeworld still watching from the shadows. "This is Captain Darius of the Human Federation," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Let this message serve as a warning to the Zurak swarm and any who would threaten the innocent." The comms across the fleet broadcast his words, and soon they would be transmitted beyond the system, across Zurak-controlled space and deep into the neutral territories. "You have preyed upon the weak for too long, believing yourselves untouchable. That ends today. The galaxy will no longer bow to your terror. Humanity will stand between you and those you seek to destroy." The bridge crew listened in silence, each word carrying the weight of humanity's resolve. Darius's eyes narrowed as he leaned closer to the console. "This isn't a declaration of war, nor is it an offer of peace. It is a simple truth. If you raise your weapons against the innocent, we will come. If you seek to destroy, we will be there to stop you. And if you choose to test our strength again, know this." He paused for just a moment, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "We will finish what we started today." Across the Zurak fleet, the captured commanders listened to the broadcast, their expressions grim. The hum of the human fleet in the background, the quiet precision with which they worked, and the sight of the Zurak warships reduced to debris. It was a message stronger than any words. In a darkened cell aboard Valor's Edge, Commander Calrose sat in silence, staring at the cold metal walls. The weight of defeat pressed down on him, heavier than his shackles. But what haunted him most was not the loss itself. It was the knowledge that the Zurek swarm had finally encountered an enemy they could not intimidate. For years, the Zurek had believed themselves the apex predators of the galaxy. Now, they knew better. Days later, the galactic response. News of the battle spread faster than the light from the distant stars. Across hundreds of systems, governments and leaders, some allies, some adversaries, listened carefully to the recording of Captain Darius's words. On the distant world of Variant 5, home to one of the galaxy's largest trading hubs, alien merchants whispered of humanity's rise. Their ships, once dismissed as lesser vessels, were now spoken of in the same breath as legendary warfleets. In the halls of the Xeranthi Coalition, an alliance of neutral star systems, political leaders replayed the message, dissecting every word. Some saw it as an opportunity, a chance to forge new alliances with humanity. Others saw it as a threat, but no one ignored it. Humanity had made their position clear. They would no longer be bystanders. On Tarvos, a symbol of hope. On the surface of Tarvos, the rebuilding had already begun. Human engineers worked alongside the Tarvosi people, repairing homes, restoring power, and creating defenses to ensure the Zurek would never return. Near the heart of the capital, a new monument began to take shape, a towering structure formed from the wreckage of Zurek warships. At its center stood the insignia of the Human Federation, a symbol not of conquest, but of protection. The small alien girl who had once feared for her life stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as the final piece of the monument was placed. She held her grandmother's hand, her gaze fixed on the sky. "They'll come back one day, won't they?" the girl asked softly. The elder nodded, her silver skin glinting in the sunlight. "Perhaps, but the humans will come too." The girl smiled faintly. "Then we don't have to be afraid anymore." As the sun set over Tarvos, the stars began to appear, and with them, the distant glimmer of the human fleet departing. They left behind a world saved from destruction, and a galaxy forever changed by their presence. And high above, the ships of humanity sailed forward, ready to meet whatever threats awaited beyond the stars.